The Dyatlov Pass incident. Welcome to the History American podcast. We explore the stories that transformed the opinions of our citizens and shaped our collective memory. Here, we don't just narrate the past. We analyze and focus on the events that live on in the mind of America. A journey to the heart of the facts that defined us.
You know, it is a premise that almost completely defies comprehension. We are heading deep into the freezing, just totally unforgiving wilderness of the Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union. And the year is 1959.
Yeah, and I really want you, the listener, just imagine this for a second. Truly put yourself right in this environment. You are stranded in sub-zero temperatures. It is the dead of night, and it's just pitch black darkness all around.
Right, with the wind just absolutely howling.
Exactly. And then you hear something, or maybe you see something that is so utterly terrifying that taking a knife, slicing your own way out of your canvas tent, and running out into a freezing, deadly wilderness barefoot seems like the safest option. I mean, what on earth could cause that level of pure, unadulterated panic?
And, well, that exact question is the axis around which this entire historical anomaly spins. Because the scope of this mystery is just immense. I mean, we are looking at a slashed tent, yes, but also clothing that was laced with anomalous high levels of beta radiation.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. Plus, missing tongues, shattered skulls with literally no external bruising, and theories that range from incredibly rare natural acoustic phenomena to, Soviet military weapons testing cover-ups.
And we actually have their diaries and their photographs right up to their final hours, don't we?
We do, yeah. We know exactly what they were seeing and doing before the timeline just completely shatters into absolute chaos.
Which, makes it all the more chilling.
Yeah.
This isn't a story of people who just vanished without a trace. It's a story of people who left behind almost too many traces, and none of them make logical sense together.
Or just contradict each other.
Exactly. So to understand the panic, we first have to establish who these people were. Because if you hear, hikers freeze to death, the immediate assumption is often that they were just amateurs making silly mistakes, that they simply got in over their heads.
But they were the furthest thing from amateurs. I mean, in the Soviet Union at that time, mountaineering and wilderness skiing, they were highly regulated, serious athletic pursuits.
Right, it wasn't just a weekend hobby.
Not at all. To undertake a journey like this, you had to be aiming for a grade 3rd certification, which was the absolute highest possible rank in the Soviet hiking syndicate. It required traversing 300 kilometers of just totally treacherous terrain.
Wow, 300 kilometers. So let's bring them into focus for the listener. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, who was a 23-year-old, fifth-year radio engineering student. And he was known for being a very meticulous, sometimes even rigid planner.
Yeah, he ran a tight ship.
He really did. Then we have Zinaida Kolmogorova, Ludmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Rustam Slobodin, Yuri Krivonashenko, Yuri Doroshenko, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol. And all of them were associated with the Ural Polytechnical Institute.
And they were all in their early 20s, all incredibly fit, and all highly experienced in winter survival.
Right. But then there was the outlier, Semyon Zolotaryov.
Semyon Zolotaryov is just such a fascinating figure in this whole narrative. He was significantly older, 38 years old, actually. He was a sports instructor, and most importantly, a highly decorated combat veteran of the Second World War.
Oh, wow. So he had seen real action.
Oh, absolutely. He had survived some of the most brutal frontline fighting imaginable, and he was brought onto the expedition relatively late, mostly to help him achieve his own master certification.
So you have this group of brilliant, resilient engineering students guided by a meticulous leader and accompanied by a battle-hardened war veteran. It's a solid team.
It's an incredibly solid team, and there was actually a 10th member when they first set out from civilization, a young man named Yuri Yudin.
Yeah, Yuri Yudin. And his story is sort of the quiet, lingering tragedy beneath the much louder mystery of the deep dive.
It really is. Because on January 28th, which was just a few days into the preliminary trek, Yuri Yudin suffered a really severe flare-up of sciatica.
And for anyone who hasn't experienced it, sciatica is a chronic nerve condition that sends agonizing, shooting pain right down the back and legs. So doing a 300-kilometer ski trek with that in minus 20 degrees is literally physically impossible.
He couldn't even walk properly, let alone ski, so he was forced to turn back. He hugged his friends goodbye, collected some rock samples for the university, and just walked back to the nearest settlement.
And that agonizing physical pain inadvertently saved his life.
Yes. And, Yuryudin lived the rest of his life completely haunted by this. He was actually the one called to the morgue weeks later to identify their personal belongings, their cameras, their torn clothes.
That must have been horrific for him.
It's just devastating. He spent decades trying to figure out what happened to them, completely unable to forgive himself for not being on the mountain with them, as if, his presence could have somehow altered their fate.
Man, survivor's guilt is so brutal. Well, let's trace the actual route that led them to that mountain. It starts on January 23rd, 1959. They take a train from Sverdlovsk to a city called Serov.
Right, and looking at the diaries and the photographs from this specific leg of the trip, it's really vital to establish their psychological baseline here. They were not stressed. They were not paranoid in the slightest.
Yeah, there's a great anecdote from the train station where Yuri Travanichenko was actually briefly detained by the local police. And it was just for singing out loud and playing his mandolin in the station.
I love that detail. And a drunk man even came up and accused them of stealing his vodka.
Exactly. It's just entirely normal, youthful stuff. The diaries reflect this very jovial, completely relaxed atmosphere. I mean, they were making jokes, taking candid photos of each other.
So from Serov, they took another train to Ivdel, then a bus to a settlement called Vizhai, and finally an open-backed truck ride to a logging community known as District 41.
That sounds like a long, freezing trip just to get to the starting line.
Oh, it was. And from there, they hired a horse-drawn sled to take their heaviest gear to an abandoned geological mining settlement, which is exactly where Yuryudin's nerve pain became too much to bear.
Right, so after saying goodbye to Yuryudin, the remaining 9 began their true wilderness trek. They strapped on their heavy wooden skis and headed out toward the mountain known to the indigenous Manthi peoples as Kolad Shakal.
And the translation of Kolat Shakal from the local Mansi language is often cited as Dead Mountain, or sometimes Mountain of the Dead.
I mean, that is an incredibly ominous name. But these hikers were rationalists. They were engineers, scientists. They really weren't deterred by local folklore.
Not at all. They were making very detailed preparations. They even put together a satirical handwritten newspaper during the trip, which they called the Evening O Torten.
Yeah, they were making jokes about their hike and poking fun at each other's snoring. The morale was incredibly high. But this is where their decision-making starts to, warrant some serious scrutiny.
Right, the campsite choice.
Exactly. On the evening of February 1st, Igor Dyatlov chooses to pitch their large canvas tent on the exposed, freezing, completely barren slope of Kolat Syakhl. Why do that? I mean, why not just ski down a few hundred meters into the tree line where the dense forest would break that brutal Siberian wind?
It seems counterintuitive, right?
It seems like a glaring error for a supposed expert. Any modern extreme hiker would want the shelter of the trees.
Well, investigators and mountaineers have debated that specific decision for decades. The prevailing consensus among wilderness experts today is basically twofold. First, Igor Dyatlov likely wanted to practice slope camping.
Okay, so a training exercise.
Yeah, they were explicitly preparing for even more difficult Arctic expeditions in the future, where tree lines just wouldn't exist at all. So they really needed the practice of anchoring a large tent in high wind exposed conditions.
That actually makes a lot of sense. What's the second reason?
The second reason is purely logistical. Climbing that slope in deep snow takes massive caloric energy. Igor Dyatlov simply might not have wanted to lose the altitude they had spent all day gaining, just to sleep in the trees and have to physically climb all the way back up the next morning.
So they were trying to be ruthlessly efficient with their energy.
Exactly. And we know they were heavily focused on energy management because earlier that day, on February 1st, they built a cache in the snow, a supply drop that they called a labaz.
Right, they buried a ton of stuff there.
They buried 55 kilograms of extra food and heavy gear right in the snowpack. They left it behind to lighten their physical load for the final push to the summit, fully planning to pick it up on their way back down.
So this is clearly the behavior of a highly organized, forward-thinking team. They were managing their risk perfectly.
They absolutely were.
Okay, so they do all this meticulous preparation, they dig into the snowpack, they pitch their tent on the slope of Kolat Shakhl as the sun goes down on February 1st, and then absolute silence. They just vanish from the historical record.
It's eerie.
Very. The group was scheduled to send a telegraph back to their sports club in Sverdlovsk by February 12th to announce they had safely returned to the settlement of Vizhai. But February 12th comes and goes, and the telegraph machine just stays quiet.
Now, in the context of 1959 Soviet winter expeditions, a delay of a few days wasn't really an immediate cause for a massive panic. Blizzards could easily slow a team down.
Sure, weather is unpredictable.
But as the days relentlessly ticked by, the families of the hikers started to demand action from the university and local officials. By February 20th, the Ural Polytechnical Institute organized volunteer searchers, mostly fellow students and hikers.
It escalates pretty quickly from there.
It does. Soon after the students go out, the military and police were literally forced to intervene, deploying airplanes and helicopters over the vast taiga.
It balloons into a massive, multi-agency operation. And finally, on February 26th, 2 student searchers, Boris Slopsov and Mikhail Shervin, are pushing through the deep snow on the slope of Kolatsiakal.
Yeah.
And they spot an anomaly.
Yeah, it's the tent.
And the physical condition of that tent is the very first puzzle piece that just completely shatters any conventional narrative.
It's bizarre on every single level. The tent is half buried in the drifting snow, but it hasn't been collapsed by a massive weight and it hasn't been torn open by the wind either.
No, the heavy canvas has been physically slashed open. And when the investigators look at the cuts, the frayed fibers tell a really definitive story. It was repeatedly slashed from the inside.
Right. Someone took a knife in a moment of sheer desperation and basically carved an escape hatch out of their own shelter.
It's terrifying.
And furthermore, searchers found a standard issue flashlight resting on top of the snow, right on the roof of the collapsed tent. The switch was actually in the on position, though the battery had obviously long since frozen and died.
So someone turns on a flashlight, drops it on the roof of the tent, and runs. But, the most alarming detail is what the searchers find when they peer inside that slashed canvas.
The belongings.
All of the group's warm winter clothes, their thick coats, their heavy boots, their axes, their survival gear, their rations, it is all just left sitting neatly inside the tent.
And you have to understand the psychological threshold required to abandon your boots in minus 25-degree weather is staggering.
Right.
You are essentially signing your own death warrant the absolute moment your bare foot touches the snow.
Exactly, because if it's just a minor scare, you grab your boots. You have 9 highly trained survivalists who slice their way out of their own tent and plunge into a deadly winter storm, leaving the only things that can keep them alive behind. What kind of threat forces that sort of calculation?
Well, the immediate physical evidence left at the scene only deepens the confusion here. Leading away from the tent, heading down the slope, the searchers found footprints preserved in the hard-packed snow.
And these footprints confirm the frantic exit, right?
Yes and no. They were left by people who were barefoot, or wearing only socks, or in one specific case, wearing a single felt boot.
But the footprints completely contradict the panic of the slashed tent. Because, if I'm terrified enough to cut my way out of a tent, I am sprinting. I am scrambling blindly into the night.
But they weren't sprinting. The spacing of the footprints, the stride length showed they were walking. Walking. The stride length and the weight distribution of the impressions clearly indicated a walking pace. They were walking in a relatively orderly fashion, side by side or closely following each other, heading down toward the tree line about a mile away.
That makes no sense. There was no evidence of a panicked, chaotic sprint.
None whatsoever.
I am so stuck on this detail. It's a massive cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
They are terrified enough to destroy their only shelter, but composed enough to walk down the hill together, matching paces.
It implies they were escaping a localized threat, something right at the campsite, but they were trying to maintain group cohesion as they physically moved away.
So they were prioritizing distance from the tent over immediate warmth.
Exactly. And the tracks led relentlessly down the slope toward a massive, ancient cedar tree at the edge of the forest. And the very next day, February 27th, the searchers followed the trajectory of those tracks and made a grim discovery under the sprawling branches of that cedar tree.
Yeah, they find the first 2 bodies, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonyshenko.
The scene under the cedar tree is a testament to just a desperate, completely doomed struggle for survival. The 2 men were found lying next to the charred remains of a small, improvised fire.
And they were in their underwear, right?
Yes, they were in their underwear, completely barefoot, and had eventually frozen to death.
The fact that they managed to start a fire with wet, freezing wood in the pitch dark with no proper tools, that speaks to their immense skill.
But the tree itself was damaged, wasn't it?
Severely damaged. The branches of the cedar tree were snapped and broken off up to a height of 15 feet.
15 feet up. Yeah, and when searchers examined the trunk of the tree, they actually found human skin and blood embedded deep in the rough bark.
So they had frantically shinned up the trunk of a freezing tree, basically scraping the flesh off their own hands and chests just to break off wet branches for a fire.
Well, while gathering firewood is the most practical explanation, the height of 15 feet is completely excessive just for kindling. You don't need to climb that high for a small fire. It raises a much darker question.
What were they trying to see up in that tree? I mean, were they climbing up to get a vantage point? Looking back up the slope at the tent to see if whatever chased them out was gone?
That's one possibility.
Or conversely, were they trying to get away from something on the ground right beneath them?
Both scenarios suggest they were being hunted, either by a literal predator or by an overwhelming psychological fear. And as the searchers began to really probe the expanse of snow on the slope between that cedar tree and the abandoned tent, they found 3 more bodies.
Right. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin.
And they were spaced out at different intervals along the slope, entirely exposed to the elements.
And their physical poses were incredibly telling, weren't they?
They were frozen in dynamic, agonizing positions that strongly suggested they were desperately trying to crawl back up the slope. They were fighting the wind, trying to reach the tent they had just destroyed.
So the narrative starts to take shape here. They fled down to the tree line, realized the fire wasn't going to be enough, realized they were going to freeze to death in their underwear, and 3 of them made the decision to attempt the agonizing, completely impossible crawl back up the mountain to get the boots and coats.
Right. And Rustam Slobodin's discovery offers a harrowing detail about that crawl. During his autopsy, the medical examiner found a fractured skull.
A fractured skull? From what?
It was a severe blunt force injury, though arguably not immediately fatal on its own. But the searchers noted a really specific environmental anomaly when they physically lifted his body. There was a bed of solid ice directly beneath him.
Let's explain the physics of that for a second. Because snow doesn't just turn to solid ice on its own in minus 25 degrees.
Exactly the opposite, actually. It requires a significant thermal transfer. When Rustam Slobodin collapsed face down in the powder, he was still alive. His core body temperature was still radiating enough heat to actually melt the deep snow beneath him into water.
Oh, it's awful.
As his hypothermia advanced and his body slowly shut down, losing that thermal battle, the water beneath him refroze into a thick sheet of solid ice. He lay there, slowly dying, effectively casting a mold of his own final moments.
It is an utterly heartbreaking image. So at this point, it is late February, early March. The search teams have found 5 bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustam Slobodin, Yuri Doroshenko, and Yuri Krivonyshenko. But there are still 4 hikers missing somewhere in that massive mountain.
And the search for the remaining 4 proved to be just a total logistical nightmare. The winter snowpack on Kholat Shakal is incredibly deep and dense.
Right, they had to use probes.
Yes, searchers use long avalanche probes, plunging them blindly into the snow for weeks, finding absolutely nothing. It wasn't until May, when the spring thaw finally began to aggressively melt the snowpack, that they found the rest of the group.
This is the infamous May discovery. They find them down in a ravine, about 75 meters deeper into the dense woods from the cedar tree, buried under 15 feet of packed snow.
The bodies belonged to Lyudmila Dubanina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, and Semyon Zolotaryov.
And what did the forensic scene look like down there?
The forensic scene in the ravine indicated they had spent significant time and effort fashioning a makeshift snow den. They had actually cut down small fir trees and laid them out in a trench, clearly trying to insulate themselves from the freezing ground and shelter from the harsh wind.
They were doing exactly what survival manuals tell you to do. But when the medical examiners perform the autopsies on these 4, well, the reports shift the entire case from a tragic exposure incident into something resembling a horror film.
The injuries were entirely different.
Right. The first 5 hikers died of hypothermia. They froze. But these 4 in the ravine, something incredibly violent happened to them in the dark.
The internal injuries were completely inexplicable. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol suffered a massive shattered skull. The forensic examiner explicitly noted that the force required to cause that specific fracture pattern was immense, far beyond a simple slip and fall in the snow.
And then there's the chest trauma on Lyudmila Dubanina and Semyon Zolotaryov.
Yeah. The pathology reports for Lyudmila Dubanina and Semyon Zolotaryov detailed massive symmetrical chest fractures. We are talking about multiple ribs snapped on both the left and right sides of their rib cages, causing massive internal hemorrhaging.
And the medical examiner famously, and perhaps somewhat unhelpfully, described the trauma as being equivalent to the concussive force of a high-speed car crash.
But let's break down why that analogy is so baffling. If you are hit by a car or if you fall off a cliff, you have massive external trauma. You have deep bruising, lacerations, scraped skin, crushed soft tissue at the actual point of impact.
But the autopsies revealed they didn't have any of that, right?
None. There was a complete absence of external bruising or soft tissue damage on their chests. The skin was entirely unbroken. It was as if an immense, uniform, static pressure had simply materialized around them and squeezed the life out of them, crushing their internal architecture without leaving a mark on the surface.
It totally defies the basic physics of a blunt impact. And we really have to talk about the soft tissue injuries to their faces, because this is the part of the story that fuels all the darkest, most terrifying theories about this deep dive.
Yes. When the bodies were recovered from the ravine, Lyudmila Dubinina was found missing both her eyes, missing her tongue, and missing a significant portion of her facial tissue around the mouth. Semyon Zolotaryov was also missing his eyes.
Which sounds insane.
Now, from a strictly biological and forensic standpoint, we have to acknowledge the environment. They were found face down in a stream bed during the spring thaw. Running water and natural scavengers like birds, rodents, they will rapidly consume exposed, soft facial tissues first. It is just a grim reality of nature taking its course.
Right. It sounds like a horror movie, but scavengers are incredibly efficient. It's purely biological. But there's a specific detail in the autopsy report regarding the tongue that challenges the scavenger theory, isn't there?
There is a highly contested detail, yes. The autopsy report noted the presence of a significant amount of coagulated blood located in Lyudmila Dubinina's stomach.
Let's explain why that matters forensically to you, the listener.
In forensic pathology, the mechanism of swallowing requires active muscle contraction. If a body is dead, blood simply pools due to gravity. But swallowing a large volume of your own blood implies that your autonomic nervous system is still functioning.
Oh my.
It strongly suggests the possibility that Lyudmila Dubinina's tongue was removed or torn out by massive blunt force trauma to the jaw while her heart was still actively beating and she was fully capable of swallowing.
It's pure nightmare fuel. The idea of enduring that kind of trauma while alive in the freezing dark is absolutely beyond comprehension. And layered on top of these catastrophic injuries is the macabre wardrobe swaps. The way the bodies in the ravine were dressed tells a story of absolute desperation.
It clearly appears that the 4 survivors in the ravine outlived the others, and in a final bid for warmth, they scavenged clothing from their friends who had already succumbed to the cold under the cedar tree.
They took their clothes.
Yes. For example, Lyudmila Dubinina's foot was found wrapped in a torn piece of woolen clothing, and she was actually wearing a brown sweater that was positively identified as belonging to Yuri Krivonishenko.
And what about the others?
Semyon Zolotaryov was found wearing a hat and a coat that belonged to Yuri Doroshenko.
Just visualize the sheer psychological terror of this phase of the night. You have 4 people hiding in a shallow snow trench in the pitch dark. They're wearing the clothes they just had to peel off the freezing, rigid corpses of their friends.
Waiting.
Yeah, waiting in the dark, surrounded by whatever immense force just caused those massive crush injuries, knowing no one is coming to save them.
It really paints a portrait of raw human survival instinct kicking in under the most extreme, neurologically taxing conditions imaginable. They were doing everything right, utilizing every available resource, and it still just wasn't enough.
Before we pivot and dive deep into the specific theories of what exactly caused this chaos, the avalanches, the spies, the secret weapons, we want to take a brief pause. We want to thank you, the listener, for joining us on this extensive deep dive. Researching the intricate historical and forensic details of these events takes immense time, and we want to issue a cordial reminder that listeners can support the show's ongoing research through the PayPal link located right in the description. Your direct support is what allows us to keep uncovering these incredible historical mysteries.
So, when we look at the attempts to rationally explain this tragedy, we really must start with the natural explanations. These are the theories most often cited by official government investigations, primarily because they don't require human malevolence.
Right, and the most prominent and frequently debated natural theory is the avalanche, or more specifically, a specialized event known as a snow slab.
Yes. Now, I know the Russian government recently reopened the case and officially blamed an avalanche, but anyone who looks at photographs of Kolatchakal immediately sees a problem with that.
The slope where they pitched the tent is relatively shallow, isn't it?
It is. It's about 23 degrees. It simply doesn't look steep enough to generate a massive, roaring, Hollywood-style avalanche.
Exactly.
That shallow angle is exactly why traditional avalanche theories were dismissed for decades. However, in 2021, two researchers based in Switzerland, Alexander Puzrin and Johann Gaum, published a highly detailed study proposing a very specific, localized mechanism: a rare slab avalanche.
And how does that differ?
They argued that the hikers themselves inadvertently triggered their own demise. When Igor Dyatlov and the group dug into the snowpack to create a flat shelf to pitch their large tent, they critically weakened the structural integrity of the snow layers directly above them.
They undermine their own foundation.
Precisely. The theory posits that hours later, as the temperature plummeted, strong katabatic winds began to howl. Katabatic winds are heavy, high-density, incredibly cold winds that flow rapidly down a slope due to gravity.
Okay, so the wind is pushing down on the slope.
Right. These winds deposited massive amounts of extra snow on the weakened slope directly above the tent. Eventually, the friction holding the layers together simply failed, and a solid block, a slab of dense, compacted snow, slid down directly onto the tent.
Okay, I understand the physics of the slab avalanche, but I have a major problem with the psychology of this theory. Let's say a heavy block of snow slides onto your tent in the dark. It's terrifying. It might even crush some ribs, which would explain Semyon Zolotaryov and Lyudmila Dubinina's injuries if they were sleeping on their sides.
It could explain the crush injuries, yes.
But if an avalanche buries you, your immediate instinct is to dig frantically. You dig for air, you dig for your gear, you do not politely cut a hole in the canvas, crawl out, leave your heavy boots sitting right there, and walk away in an orderly line. Avalanches don't give you time to calmly walk away side by side.
The orderly retreat is the massive stumbling block for the slab avalanche theory. It can perhaps explain the blunt force trauma, but it entirely fails to explain the methodical walking footprints leading away.
Yeah, why not spend 60 seconds digging out the boots that are literally the difference between life and death?
Exactly. And, as we discussed, an avalanche certainly does not explain a missing tongue with a functioning cardiovascular system.
Speaking of the lack of clothing, we have to talk about the biology of freezing to death, because finding people stripped down to their underwear in the snow seems completely insane. But it isn't actually that uncommon in extreme hypothermia cases, is it?
It is a tragically common and well-documented physiological response known as paradoxical undressing. To understand it, we really have to look at how the human body defends itself against extreme cold.
How so?
In freezing temperatures, the body's autonomic nervous system constricts the blood vessels in your extremities, your arms and legs. This is called vasoconstriction. It sacrifices the fingers and toes to keep warm blood circulating in your vital organs at the core.
Wait, it's a triage system. Keep the heart and brain alive at all costs.
But as a person reaches the final lethal stages of severe hypothermia, the tiny muscles that have been forcefully contracting those blood vessels for hours suddenly become exhausted. They undergo catastrophic failure. The vessels suddenly dilate, vasodilation.
And all that warm blood trapped in the core suddenly rushes back out into the freezing tissue of the arms and legs.
When that rush of blood hits the extremities, the person's skin suddenly feels burning hot. Concurrently, the victim's brain is already severely impaired and confused by the cold.
So they don't know what's real.
No. The hypothalamus, which regulates body temperature, misinterprets this rapid, localized heat flush as actual extreme external heat. The victim genuinely feels like they are on fire, and in their terminal delirium, they frantically tear off their clothes to cool down.
I always compare this to a broken home thermostat. Imagine your house is freezing cold, minus 20 degrees. But the thermostat's internal sensor breaks and suddenly registers the room temperature as 100 degrees. The system panics. It cranks the AC to the absolute maximum, pumping freezing air into a house that's already an icebox, trying to cool down a fire that doesn't exist. It's a tragic biological glitch. Their own bodies betrayed their minds right at the very end.
It's a devastating mechanism, and it beautifully explains why Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonashenko were found in their underwear by the fire. Furthermore, another hypothermic behavior is terminal burrowing, where victims in the final stages of freezing attempt to hide in small enclosed spaces.
Which perfectly aligns with the group in the ravine building a snow den.
Exactly.
But the paradox remains. Paradoxical undressing happens at the very end of hypothermia. It doesn't explain what triggered the initial panic, what drove 9 rational people to cut out of a warm tent before the hypothermia even set in. This brings us to a much more abstract natural theory, infrasound.
The infrasound theory is arguably the most unsettling of the natural explanations. It hinges on an acoustic phenomenon known as a von Karman vortex street.
Explain how wind creates sound waves that can drive people mad.
Well, the theory posits that the specific dome-like topography of Kholat Syakhl acting as a blunt obstacle, combined with the high-velocity, high-density winter winds, created a very specific aerodynamic effect.
Sort of like blowing over a bottle.
Similar, yes. As the wind whipped around the mountain, it formed swirling, alternating vortices of air. Under the right meteorological conditions, these vortices act almost like a giant flute, generating incredibly powerful low-frequency sound waves. This is infrasound.
And infrasound is fascinating because it exists at a frequency below 20 hertz.
Yeah.
Humans cannot consciously hear it with our ears, but our internal organs actually feel it.
It's akin to the resonant frequency that can make a wine glass vibrate and shatter, but instead of glass, the acoustic energy is interacting with your physiological systems. Extensive studies in acoustics and aerospace medicine have shown that exposure to high-decibel infrasound, specifically around the resonant frequency of the human eye and inner ear, can induce severe physiological and psychological reactions.
What does it actually feel like to a person?
Yeah.
Like if I'm standing there, what do I experience?
It manifests as intense, inexplicable nausea, shortness of breath, a sudden spiking heart rate, and most importantly, an overwhelming irrational feeling of impending doom. The amygdala, the fear center of the brain, is triggered without any visual or auditory threat.
Oh, wow.
The infrasound theory suggests the hikers were trapped inside their tent, suddenly bombarded by this invisible, silent acoustic energy. They felt an overwhelming biological terror they couldn't see or fight, and they simply panicked, slashing the tent to escape the localized acoustic pressure.
It's a terrifying concept.
Yeah.
Being driven out into the cold by the sound of the wind basically vibrating your own eyeballs. But while it explains the panic, it still doesn't neatly tie up the massive car crash-style chest-crushing injuries found in the ravine months later. When the natural theories fail to encompass all the evidence, we are really forced to look at the human element. For a long time early in the investigation, intense suspicion fell on the indigenous Mansi people.
It was an immediate and perhaps highly prejudiced assumption by the Soviet investigators. The Mansi are skilled hunters, trappers, and reindeer herders native to the harsh Ural region.
And the investigators went after them.
Aggressively. The investigators initially aggressively interrogated several Mansi hunters, operating on the theory that the hikers had trespassed on a sacred site or interfered with a hunting ground and had been violently dispatched for it.
But when you actually look at the facts, the experts cleared the Mansi entirely.
They were completely exonerated. Ethnographic investigators determined that the mountain, Kholat Syakhl, was not actually considered a highly sacred or forbidden zone by the Mansi culture. It was really just a harsh piece of terrain.
Right, and they actually helped with the search, didn't they?
More importantly, the Mansi people were incredibly helpful. They willingly joined the search parties, providing invaluable local tracking knowledge and bringing their hunting dogs to help find the bodies buried in the snow. Furthermore, the forensics just didn't match.
Yeah, so?
A human attack leaves a highly specific signature: stab wounds, bullet holes, defensive lacerations, signs of a hand-to-hand struggle. The victims had massive internal trauma, but no external assault marks. The Mansi theory was firmly shut down.
Another human theory that often gets traction revolves around the brutal Soviet Gulag system. The Evdel area, exactly where they were hiking, was known for its network of harsh Gulag labor camps. The theory asks, could desperate, violent escapees from the camps have stumbled upon the bright canvas tent and attacked the students for their supplies?
It's a logical assumption, given the geography of the mid-20th century Soviet Union. Escaped prisoners in the taiga face immediate starvation and freezing. A well-stocked hiker tent would be a massive prize.
Right, they'd want the food.
Exactly. However, the physical evidence at the scene thoroughly debunks a robbery motive. In the economy of wilderness survival, calories and gear are currency. Yet nothing of value was stolen.
They left the money.
They left behind their heavy coats, money, expensive cameras, and a flask of alcohol. Any desperate escapee in that freezing wilderness would have stripped that tent bare. They definitely wouldn't have left the boots.
So we can confidently rule out a simple robbery or a local dispute. But what if the human element wasn't a random encounter? What if it was highly coordinated espionage? This brings us to the CIA and KGB controlled delivery spy theory. And I have to say, this is where the historical record starts to read like a Cold War thriller by John le Carré.
This theory is incredibly intricate and was heavily popularized by the Russian researcher Alexei Rakitin. It doesn't view the hikers as random victims, but focuses intensely on the specific backgrounds of 3 hikers: Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolevatov, and Yuri Krivonischenko.
Why them specifically?
Yuri Krivonischenko's background is particularly vital here. He was not just a student, he had actually worked as an engineer at the highly secretive Mayak nuclear facility.
And we have to give context to Mayak for you, the listener. The Mayak facility is infamous in nuclear history because in 1957, just 2 years before this hike, there was a massive, disastrous nuclear leak there, the Kishtim disaster. It was one of the worst nuclear accidents in history, and the Soviet government was desperately trying to keep it a secret from the West.
Yes. So Alexei Rakitin's theory posits that Yuri Krivonischenko, along with the older war veterans Semyon Zolotaryov and Alexander Kolevatov, were secretly working as double agents for the KGB. Their mission on this hike was to conduct a classic espionage maneuver known as a controlled delivery. They were supposedly scheduled to rendezvous with undercover CIA agents or Western sympathizers deep in the remote, unmonitored wilderness of the Ural Mountains.
A dead drop in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. They were to hand over seemingly innocuous items, specifically the woolen sweaters they were wearing. But these sweaters had been deliberately laced with trace amounts of radioactive isotopes from the Mayak facility. The clothing would serve as physical, undeniable proof to the Americans of the secret Soviet nuclear program and the hidden disaster.
But according to the theory, the dead drop goes horribly wrong. Either a misunderstanding occurs in the dark, or the CIA agents suddenly realize they are walking into a KGB trap, and the tension just explodes into a massacre.
The theory attempts to neatly explain the 2 most glaring anomalies of the case. First, the presence of radioactivity on the clothing. Second, the brutal, specialized nature of the blunt force trauma.
Like military techniques.
Exactly. Alexei Rakitin argues that the massive chest crushing without external bruising was the result of specialized, lethal, hand-to-hand combat techniques utilized by elite Western special forces, essentially interrogating and executing the hikers without leaving obvious weapon marks.
I mean, it is a wild, sprawling theory. It grounds the mystery in the very real paranoia of the Cold War.
Okay.
But I have to push back on the logistics here. It requires a staggering amount of coincidences. You're telling me elite CIA agents parachuted into deep Siberian snow, hiked through minus 25-degree blizzards just to get a sweater from some engineering students?
It is a bit much.
And then they managed to kill them with martial arts and vanish without leaving a single boot print or parachute scrap behind. The Hollywood nature of it makes it a massive stretch for me. If we were talking about brutal physical attacks with no footprints, what about animals? We talked about the missing tongue and eyes. What if a wolverine attacked the tent?
The wolverine theory is frequently brought up because it fits the harsh environment perfectly. Wolverines are notoriously aggressive, highly territorial scavengers with immense jaw strength. The theory suggests a wolverine got into the tent while they were sleeping, perhaps searching for the food cache.
They do have a terrible smell too, right?
They do. Wolverines also possess a highly potent, foul, musky scent gland. The theory argues that the aggressive animal and the blinding stench drove the hikers to cut their way out in a blind panic. There are also more fringe theories involving the Russian Yeti, or Almasty, which have been heavily popularized by speculative television documentaries.
I have to admit, if I'm waking up in the pitch dark and I see the glowing eyes of a massive wolverine inside my small tent, I am absolutely taking a knife to the canvas and getting out. But the forensic evidence just doesn't support an animal attack, does it?
It simply doesn't. When investigators meticulously mapped the area around the tent, they found no animal tracks in the snow whatsoever, only the hikers' own footprints. Furthermore, wild animals kill in very specific ways.
Tearing and biting.
Yes. A wolverine or a bear will bite, claw, tear soft tissue, and cause massive lacerations. An animal does not inflict the kind of massive distributed blunt force trauma that shatters a dense human skull or crushes a rib cage while leaving the skin completely unbroken. The animal attack theories, while viscerally terrifying, are widely dismissed by serious researchers simply for lacking physical evidence.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps the most compelling and heavily debated category of theories: the military cover-up and secret weapons testing. Because when you look past the snow and the autopsies, there are things in the official bureaucratic files that absolutely reek of a coordinated cover-up. Let's start with the sky. Let's talk about the glowing orbs.
The meteorological and astronomical reports from the region in February and March of 1959 are incredibly anomalous. There were multiple, entirely independent reports of strange phenomena in the sky over the Urals.
Other people saw things.
Yes. Another entirely separate group of hikers, who were located about 30 miles south of Kholat Shakhl, officially reported seeing massive glowing orange orbs or fireballs hovering in the night sky on the exact dates matching the incident. Local residents of Ivdel, meteorological observers, and even highly experienced aviation pilots, like a man named Gennady Patushev, reported seeing these glowing spheres moving silently through the sky.
So we have credible eyewitnesses, pilots, and meteorologists seeing fire in the sky over the exact mountains right around the exact time the hikers die. What does that point to in 1959 Soviet Russia?
Well, many modern researchers and aerospace historians connect these sightings directly to highly classified Soviet military weapons testing. The late 1950s was the absolute peak of the space race and missile development. The sightings strongly correlate with the launch trajectories of R-7 intercontinental ballistic missiles being tested from the Kapustin Yar testing range, or perhaps the testing of classified aerial mines or high-altitude detonation devices.
If an aerial mine or rocket stage exploded in the sky directly above Kholat Shakhl while the hikers were sleeping, that would explain so much of the chaos. It would explain a sudden blinding light or a deafening, terrifying sonic boom that made them think the world was ending, prompting them to cut their way out of the tent instantly.
It definitely would.
It would explain why the tops of the high cedar tree branches were strangely scorched. It could explain the unexplained burns found on Yuri Krivonashenko's hands.
Most importantly, the weapons testing theory provides a highly plausible mechanical mechanism for the inexplicable internal injuries. A high-altitude or low-yield aerial explosion creates a massive, invisible, concussive blast wave. This is a wall of pressurized air moving faster than the speed of sound. If Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol were caught in the direct path of that concussive blast wave, perhaps amplified or funneled by the geographical shape of the ravine they were hiding in, the sudden spike in atmospheric pressure could easily cause massive internal crushing injuries and shattered skulls without leaving the external soft tissue bruising you would get from a physical blow.
It's exactly like the physics of artillery warfare. If you were standing too close to an artillery shell going off, you don't need shrapnel to hit you. The invisible shockwave alone compresses your chest cavity, scrambles your internal organs, and shatters bones without ever breaking the skin. It fits the pathology perfectly. And this military testing angle ties directly into the radioactivity anomaly, doesn't it?
It does, and the radioactivity is the absolute smoking gun for many investigators. The lead Soviet investigator assigned to the case, Lev Ivanov, was a thorough and highly perceptive detective. When he attended the autopsies, he noted a strange, unnatural reddish-orange coloration on the exposed skin of the bodies.
He thought it was chemical or radioactive.
Combining this with the civilian reports of fireballs, he secretly ordered specialized radiological tests on the victims' clothing and biological samples. The results came back remarkably positive. Several garments, notably the brown sweaters worn by Lyudmila Dubinina and Alexander Kolevatov, showed significantly high, localized levels of beta radiation.
Let's clarify beta radiation. Beta particles don't penetrate deeply. They are surface-level contaminants, often associated with fallout or direct contact with radioactive material. Finding high levels of beta radiation on a hiking sweater in the middle of a pristine wilderness is a massive red flag. And what happened when Lev Ivanov formally reported this finding to his superiors in the government?
The reaction was swift and absolute. Top Soviet officials abruptly ordered Lev Ivanov to immediately classify the radiation findings. They ordered him to shut down the criminal investigation prematurely and officially rule the cause of death as a vague, compelling natural force.
Compelling natural force.
Yes. He was explicitly instructed to bury the radiation reports deep in the secret archives. Lev Ivanov actually later admitted in interviews in the 1990s that he fully believed the military was hiding a weapons test gone wrong.
I mean, that bureaucratic reaction is the absolute definition of a cover-up. If it was truly just an avalanche, why on earth would the government classify radiation tests? Why shut down a high-profile investigation so fast and invent a phrase like compelling natural force? And there were other forensic signs that the scene itself was staged or tampered with by the military before the students ever found it.
The forensic evidence of staging is highly compelling. Let's look closely at the autopsy report of Yuri Doroshenko. When searchers found him under the cedar tree, he was lying flat, face down in the snow. However, the medical examiner explicitly noted the presence of livor mortis, the post-mortem pooling of blood on his back.
Wait a minute, let's look at the physics of that. Livor mortis is purely gravity-driven. When the heart stops, the blood settles at the lowest physical point of the body. If he died face down in the snow and froze there, the The livor mortis should exclusively be on his chest and stomach.
Exactly.
If the blood pooling is on his back, it means he died lying flat on his back. The blood pooled there over several hours, and then someone or something physically flipped his heavy frozen body over into the face-down position long after he was dead.
Exactly. A frozen human body is incredibly difficult to move. The mismatched livor mortis strongly suggests deliberate post-mortem manipulation of the crime scene, and the procedural anomalies don't stop with the bodies. Decades after the event, a nurse who worked at a local regional hospital came forward with a startling claim.
What did she say?
She stated that military personnel brought several bodies into the hospital morgue for a covert examination before the official discovery dates in late February.
Implying that the military knew exactly where they were, found them first, evaluated the situation, and then allowed the student search parties to discover the tent later to control the public narrative.
Furthermore, when researchers eventually gained access to the official criminal case file after the fall of the Soviet Union, they noticed a glaring chronological error. The cover of the official investigative file is legally dated February 6th.
February 6th. That is an incredible detail. That's almost 3 full weeks before the student searchers, Boris Slapsov and Mikhail Sherevin, finally found the tent on the 26th. On February 6th, the hikers hadn't even missed their telegram deadline yet. No one in the public knew they were missing.
The predated file is viewed by many researchers as absolute proof of prior knowledge. Added to this intense secrecy, the families of the young victims were aggressively coerced into signing non-disclosure agreements prohibiting them from ever publicly discussing the incident.
And the funerals, too.
Right. When the final 4 victims with the massive crush injuries were recovered in May, they were buried in tightly sealed, closed caskets, with the funerals heavily monitored and restricted by state authorities.
Okay, let's play out this military staging scenario to its logical conclusion.
Yeah.
It's a terrifying thought. Did the Soviet military test an aerial weapon, realize they accidentally blasted a group of elite university students, and then panic? Did they fly in with covert helicopter teams, finish the job, wash the bodies in the snow to remove chemical or radioactive residue, and then meticulously arrange them on the slope to look like a bizarre freezing accident?
That is the core tenet of the staging theory. However, as investigators, we have to weigh that eerie circumstantial and bureaucratic evidence against the sheer logistical nightmares of executing such a flawless cover-up in that specific environment. Think about the reality of the terrain. It is the middle of a brutal, blinding Siberian winter. You are dealing with sudden blizzards, pitch darkness, and temperatures dropping to minus 25 degrees Celsius. The idea that a military cleanup crew could fly in on rudimentary 1950s helicopters, meticulously undress and redress 9 frozen, rigid corpses, arrange them in a highly specific, psychologically complex tableau of a panic attack, create realistic barefoot walking footprints, and do it all without leaving a massive, obvious trail of their own heavy military boot prints, helicopter landing skids, or dropped equipment in the fresh snow is incredibly difficult to accept from a practical standpoint.
It is the ultimate true crime paradox. The evidence for a cover-up is glaring. The radiation, the predated file, the mismatched livor mortis, the silenced families. But the actual physical execution of a cover-up on that freezing, chaotic mountain is functionally impossible. It's a puzzle where the pieces belong to 2 entirely different boxes.
Which is exactly why, to this day, more than 60 years later, no single theory cleanly satisfies all the evidence. If we accept it was a purely natural disaster like an avalanche, how do we explain the radioactive sweaters, the missing ton with the beating heart, and the intense classified military secrecy?
Yeah.
And if we accept it was a military cover-up, how do we explain the logistical impossibility of staging the footprints, the slashed tent, and the snow den? Every answer simply spawns 3 new impossibilities.
It leaves us in this fascinating, deeply frustrating historical limbo. We have to bring all these complex threads together. It's worth noting that the story didn't actually end in the Cold War. In 2019, due to relentless public pressure, the Russian government actually reopened the Dyatlov Pass case. They sent a modern team of forensic experts and meteorologists back to the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl.
And what did they find?
After their modern investigation, they officially, legally ruled the cause of death as a snow avalanche, combined with critically poor visibility that prevented the hikers from finding their tent again after they fled.
The official conclusion basically states that the hikers acted heroically, fighting to the bitter end, but that nature simply overwhelmed their human capacity to survive.
But for anyone who has truly dug into the weeds of the autopsy reports, the radiation anomalies, the closed caskets, the predated files, and the incredibly strange behavior of the Soviet officials, those puzzle pieces still do not entirely fit into the neat little avalanche box. The mystery stubbornly refuses to be solved.
It is a profound case study where the sheer volume of evidence, the detailed diaries, the candid photographs, the meticulous medical autopsies, somehow acts to obscure the truth rather than illuminating it. We know so much about the granular what of the incident, but the fundamental why remains agonizingly out of reach.
Before we close out this extensive journey into the Ural Mountains, we want to warmly thank you, the listener, for joining us on this deep dive into the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's a heavy, deeply unsettling topic, and we appreciate you exploring the nuances and the science of it with us. We want to remind you once more that if you found value in this deep dive, you can support our continued detailed historical research via the PayPal link right in the description. Please follow and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that defined our history.
It is so vital that we continue to question, analyze, and apply critical thinking to these historical anomalies rather than simply accepting the easiest official narrative.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to leave you with a lingering, entirely new consideration to mull over. Something we haven't touched on yet, but which really reframes how we look at history. Think about the nature of our modern digital footprints. If a group of 9 people vanished today in a perfectly identical scenario on a remote mountain, we wouldn't just have to rely on film cameras and wet paper diaries. We'd have exact GPS coordinates pinging from their phones. We'd have unsent text messages sitting in drafts. We'd have real-time heart rate and blood oxygen data synced from their smartwatches straight to the cloud.
We would have an absolute mountain of flawless digital telemetry mapping their final moments.
Right. It feels like a modern mystery would be solved instantly. But ask yourself, would that massive influx of data actually solve the mystery? Or would it just give us a million more disjointed, confusing data points to misinterpret? If a smartwatch registers a hiker's heart rate spontaneously spiking to 200 beats per minute at exactly 2:10 a.m., does that unequivocally tell us it was the terrifying roar of an avalanche, the concussive boom of a military blast, or the sheer acoustic panic of infrasound? The diaries and photographs of the 1959 hikers were supposed to provide the ultimate answers, but instead, they became the very ink in which this baffling mystery was written. Perhaps the truly terrifying truth isn't that we lack the physical evidence to solve these things, but that the human mind, analyzing a spreadsheet of facts, is utterly incapable of reconstructing the absolute chaos, the irrationality, and the sheer biological terror of a true life-or-death panic, no matter how many clues are left behind in the snow.